Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Welcome to Africa at Noon. I am Dr. Niwaeli Kimambo. I am an assistant professor of geography at Middlebury College. Greetings from Vermont. And I'm also a CV Star Fellow in International Studies. It is wonderful to be back. I'm a graduate of the geography program, and I've spent many Wednesdays at noon time in Ingram Hall, growing and learning from Africanists. So I feel a lot of nostalgia. I wish I was in the room with you there. I'm here to introduce our speaker today and serve as today's discussion moderator. And I want to first thank the African Studies program for organizing and hosting this talk. And then I also want to especially thank my former advisor, Professor Lisa Norton, who has helped make this whole event happen. Your virtual hand clap for everybody, if you could. It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Bernadette Arakwiye. Dr. Arakwiye manages the World Resources Institute's contributions to the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative. This initiative, we'll hear a lot more about it, is the work of 34 African countries, various technical partners, grassroots groups, etc., that are working together to minimize environmental degradation and deforestation in Africa, specifically by using tree planting across the continent. And then on top of that, this is something that Dr. Arakwiye is very excited about. She's a member of a team that recently mobilized $150 million to implement Restore Local, which is a new project that is focused on accelerating locally led landscape restoration. And we'll hear a little bit more about those vital landscapes. So in her line of work, Dr. Arakwiye is supporting stakeholders to accomplish stronger restoration outcomes. She's identifying priority areas for restoration, building skills, tracking progress, and working to improve policy environments. She's a very busy person, so we appreciate very much her taking the time to share with us the achievements and uncertainties around landscape restoration. I'm also very honored to be introducing a fellow geographer and a Muddy Boots environmental researcher. Dr. Arakwiye has 14 years of experience examining African landscapes. She has been studying behavior of endangered primates in Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda. She has looked at a lot of historical and contemporary satellite imagery to analyze land cover change. And in a lot of these restoration sites, she actually goes and visits countries to look at restoration potential. She earned her PhD in geography from Clark University, and there she received a very prestigious NASA Earth and Space Sciences Fellowship. And I actually did read her dissertation, and her multifaceted knowledge of landscapes was really inspiring to me and helped along a lot of my geography thinking, especially about landscape restoration. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bernadette Arakwiye to Africa at Noon. Bernadette.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Kimambo, for that very kind introduction. And I'm really, truly grateful for this opportunity to share the work I am leading at the World Resources Institute. This is part of WRI's contribution to the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative. And I really want to express my appreciation to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the African Study Program, and to Professor Norton, our host, for extending this invitation to me. Personally, this feels like a full circle, as one of my mentors who really shaped my professional journey is also an alumni of the zoology department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And her influence has been really crucial in opening my eyes to the intricacies of natural resources research and conservation. So it's really a great honor for me to be joining you remotely. And I hope that this presentation is going to be informative and we also inspire the next generation of environmental researchers and practitioners. Let me know if you can see my screen, some thumbs up or yes. I would assume yes.
Yes.
Great. So as Niwayeli mentioned, I'm going to be sharing the work that I'm leading at the World Resources Institute, and it's WRI's contribution to this restoration movement in Africa. And before I get there, though, I want to set the scene or the stage on why do we need restoration in the first place. We've seen that decades of inefficient land use practices and overuse of environmental resources have really made the African continent one of the most degraded continents on Earth. What we read on the statistics is that 65% of Africa's arable land is becoming too degraded to support food production and other environmental services. And this degradation is not only impacting food security, it's also impacting the economy because it's costing about 56 billion in US dollars annually to really restore this land and try to amend it, the land that is degraded. But we also do know what to do. We know that there's a need to safeguard the remaining natural habitat and protect them from further degradation or fragmentation. We need to maintain forest quality, and particularly to the work that I'm closest to, the work I'm leading at the World Resources Institute, we need to restore that degraded land. And we know that there are various habitats that are degraded, and various restoration approaches should be applied as relevant and as necessary to reverse the degradation stage that we are observing today. There have been a lot of mapping to inform this widespread restoration movement, particularly on the African continent. Studies again have shown that there are about 750 million hectares of land that is suitable for restoration interventions. And based on this information and really the need to reverse land degradation, African heads of state came together in 2015 to start this restoration movement, the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative. And at that time, the commitment were about 100 million hectares that should be restored by 2030. So where are we with this movement? We have what we call phase one of the AFR 100, the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative. This first phase really ran between 2016 all the way to 2021. And during this time, we saw a lot of political will, a number of countries committing to restoring a number of hectares within their national boundaries. And some will move along to starting to explore what are those specific areas. You know, you have this big number, but where is restoration going to actually happen within the country? Some countries have also created national strategies and earmarked budget that is going to support the restoration activities. And the ones that are more advanced really started doing baseline to say, okay, in year 2016, as an example, this is what we have as land that we are targeting for restoration, and then creating appropriate or customized monitoring system to track progress. In terms of implementation, though, this is where there is a key gap. As you recall, my presentation is going to show achievement and uncertainties. One of the key gaps is really that it's still hard to know overall how much progress has been made. Most of the information that we see out there is based on self-reported information, and some numbers report about 5 million hectares or 6 million hectares under restoration since the initiative was started. We also know that there are a number of grassroots movements and organizations that are supporting this restoration movement on the ground. I'll talk more about this number that you see on the screen in the coming slides. I want to share a little more on what is restoration as we see in this movement. Nioeli, I alluded to it. We see a lot of tree-based restoration interventions being proposed, but the movement really recognized that restoration aims to improve the environment, to provide multiple services, to improve the environmental ecology and functioning of the environment in order to provide those multiple services. So restoration can target peatlands, can target mangroves, native plantation, or suite of ecosystem. And the idea here is that the right type of intervention should be applied in the right type of ecosystem. And why is this restoration being done? We are seeing that restoration movement is really being done to provide multiple environmental and socioeconomic services, such as the creation of jobs, carbon sequestration, improving water, improving community resilience to climate change, improving food security, and so on. Really, there are multiple benefits that are expected from this restoration initiative. So I talked about the movement as a whole and 34 countries that have joined it so far. Us as the World Resources Institute, we try to analyze and see how this movement is unfolding in each of the country, because at the end of the day, restoration is local, is happening within the national boundary, and it's even happening on the farm, at the farm scale. So what actually happens once these countries join the movement? We see that once countries are interested in joining the F100, they start by analyzing the degradation situation at the national level, which lands are degraded. And and they do various assessments. You may have heard about the restoration opportunity mapping assessment. These are the tools that are out there to support such processes. And once the assessments are done, the countries also start to identify what are the key type of restoration interventions based again on the context of each country. It's from those assessments that the number is derived. So when you hear that countries such as my own country, Rwanda, that has made a commitment to restore 2 million hectares of degraded and deforested land, it's from those initial assessments that sort of inform the number. Once the country is there, a hectare made to the initiative, they request technical assistance. World Resources Institute, WRI, is one of the institutions that are providing technical assistance to this country, and really going with them, accompanying them on this restoration movement. So we receive various type of requests, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide. They also establish what we call multi-stakeholder platform or national chapter for restoration. And these are platforms or a group of stakeholders that come together to discuss restoration. What should we be doing? How do we mobilize the funding? How is implementation going on the ground? How do we track progress? What are the various adaptive management that we should be implementing to make sure that we are on track to achieving our priorities or our goals? Some countries also develop national restoration strategies. This is where you will see them beyond talking about restoration to talking about, okay, once we have this restoration, how is this going to improve the economy? Some strategy try to improve coordination across multiple sectors, because this is one of the key factor that actually limits restoration progress on the ground. So like various strategies, again, adapted to the context of the country. Beyond having this big hectare commitment, we see that some countries also go all the way to the local level to starting to talk about, these are the priority landscape. This is where this is the area I will be targeting first. And then once I'm done with this, I'll shift to another geography. So we have, for instance, boundaries or polygons or provinces that have been identified in various countries to really show this is our target for now. And then, like I mentioned earlier, baselines are done and monitoring framework are built to track progress on restoration. So the World Resources Institute, like I said, is one of the technical partners that are supporting this movement. The movement it has 34 African countries that have joined it, but so far our work has targeted 8 countries because, again, limited resources, and also we want to learn before we can scale up and expand to different, more geographies on the African continent. So some of the lessons learned of the work that I'll be sharing is derived from our work supporting these restoration movements in these 8 African countries on the continent. And in terms of our work, we focus on 3 main things. Inform, this is where we create new data on tree growth because we focus on tree-based restoration intervention. So we look at tree growth and its impact, and in order to provide insight at the local, global, various scales, really to show this is how restoration is unfolding. We focus on shifting policies and creating incentives that can improve the restoration environment. And then we invest in restoration actors, where we build the capacity of restoration actors and help them to raise funding, or we raise funding on their behalf and then channel this money to those actors on the ground. I'll be telling you more about this. So starting with our inform work, which some people just categorize as our monitoring work as WRI, this is one of the things the World Resources is known for. We look at multiple scale. We generate data at the project level. So think about an organization that is implementing restoration in a particular geography, like their particular boundary where they are supporting tree-based restoration intervention. Our monitoring is fine-tuned to capturing information at that scale. But we also understand that restoration does not stop at the project level. It has direct impact within the project, but usually the idea is to transform the landscape. So we are now moving more into exploring data sets that can allow us to track progress and changes at the landscape level. And usually at the landscape level, we are looking at those intended benefits or services from restoration, such as carbon sequestration, improvement in food security, and others. And then, of course, we want to synthesize or to aggregate this information to look at bigger scale at the African continent, even at the global level, because we have programs supporting, or we are supporting program at those scales as well, to see globally as a movement, how are we doing on restoration. So going a little deeper into like the tools and the approach that we use to track tree-based restoration interventions, this was one of the tools that was developed by FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and WRI really applied it, fine-tuned it to tracking individual trees that are scattered in various land use, land cover types. So some of you that may have been involved in mapping of land use, land cover change, you know that it's really hard to actually capture these individual trees. We tend to have these maps that give us information on where there's agriculture, where there's forest, where there's water, all those bigger classes. It's hard to get information on individual trees. So our early attempt were trying to actually capture this information visually, working with actors in this landscape that know the landscape best to go to use archive of Google Earth imagery and understand changes that have happened in the landscape. As an example, as you see on the screen, you can see that in 2021, we have more trees in 2029, for instance, in this plot that we use to count trees in comparison to the trees that were there in 2021. So this technology, this approach was giving us output that are more statistic-based to understand how much trees are we starting with and what is the progress we are making after the tree-based restoration interventions have been made in a landscape. From there, though, we were able to develop wall-to-wall maps of tree cover So here we use the training samples or information that we have collected using the tool that I just showed you previously, Collect Earth, and then we train an artificial intelligence model to give us a wall-to-wall map of these trees in agricultural land. And this has greatly improved our understanding of areas where trees are being planted. Like I mentioned earlier, we were just getting statistics, but we are getting to the level where we can start saying, okay, this is an area where restoration is happening, and then using that information to cross-check with the targets and the goals that we get from the countries we are supporting. And we can tell them, okay, maybe shift your focus into this other area where we have limited trees. Really, these maps are informative both in tracking progress and also informing future restoration action. We are also have made progress on understanding changes over time. I mentioned our work looking at change in the landscape. Again, you can see that I'm still mostly talking about the biophysical changes as a result of restoration. So I believe the background here is a sentinel imagery, and we are looking at changes in tree cover in this particular habitat in one of the African landscape that we are where we are supporting restoration intervention. So really, with this wall-to-wall map, we can start to understand where restoration is happening, where trees could still be probably being cut, and then inform additional management or restoration interventions. As we learn and as we experiment with various tools, another thing that my team and my colleagues have been doing is to generate some information that can be used by various users. So we put together what we call guides that show basically synthesize the key lessons we are learning that make these tools user-friendly and really provide step-by-step information that various actors can use to replicate the methodologies that we are creating. And all these resources are available on WRI website, and I'll be also happy to share links for those interested in learning more. We also synthesize our information into what we call WRI Insight. This is one that we put out in 2021, really after noticing that we hear about the restoration movement in Africa, and yet we have little information on how much progress we are making. So in this insight that I led, we were outlining what are the key reasons why we don't understand yet why we don't understand yet restoration progress. And it ranges from the actual nature of restoration. This is something that occurs over a long time frame, and sometimes our methodology and approach aren't fine-tuned to capturing the entire process. And then there are also issues around how restoration is defined. Again, it's a broad process, and it's hard sometimes to aggregate across data when one is talking about tree-based restoration intervention and another one is talking about regenerative agriculture. So it's hard to synthesize when there is no common understanding. Of course, we don't only talk about the issues, we also propose solutions. So in this article, we outline key solutions that could help improve our understanding of restoration progress on the continent. There are also additional link to publications that have been made to explain the methodology, the methodologies that the team has created to map individual trees. This was innovative, again, because in the typical remote sensing approach don't allow us to capture individual trees, but with improved training data and improved way to classify imagery, we were able to capture the individual trees across the African continent, and it's presented in this literature that I was sharing. So that was our work on inform or monitoring. And like you said, I really shared more on the biophysical work we are doing on tracking restoration. Because my presentation is about progress and uncertainty, I would say that We are still learning on capturing the early stages of restoration, tree-based restoration interventions on the ground. As many of you may be aware, satellite imageries, they can capture images that are maybe 3 meters or 5 meters tall. So we really still need to get a better understanding of what's happening in the between year 0 and 3 after those trees have been established. Of course, there are the typical ecological approaches of field sampling and visiting what's happening. But we know that those can be very costly. We are experimenting with drone imagery to see if we could be able to capture some earlier stages of restoration. We are also exploring what type of socioeconomic indicators that we can start to observe in those early stages of restoration, such as the number of jobs created and other indicators to really bring a bigger picture on how is restoration contributing to both improving the environment and people's lives, because that's one of the key goals. So that was it on our work on monitoring restoration. Now moving into our work investing in restoration. And to set the scene here, we have seen that there is a massive funding gap that goes to both the restoration and the conservation sector. The latest literature that we consulted talk about about $300 billion per year that is lacking to support this intervention, both conservation and restoration. And we also see that even for the funding that is available, it's not really customized to the key actors that we see that are driving the restoration movement on the African continent. I'm talking about the community-based organizations or even entrepreneurs that are coming into this space to bring their support, to bring their effort in reversing land degradation. So our work on investing in land restoration in Africa, through our work, we have created a fund that we call Terra Fund for AF100. Here we are partnering with other institutions in this space, as you can see on the screen: One Tree Planted, Realize Impact, Africa Tree, and Barca. All these organizations operate in one way or another in Africa to support either entrepreneurs or community-based organizations that are involved in restoration activities. And with this Terra Fund, it's a patient capital, and we are supporting those actors that mostly the ones that are restoring land by growing trees. We've seen that there are many of them. For instance, when we launched the first call for application for this Terra Fund in September of 2021, we received over 3,200 applications in less than 2 weeks. And we were only looking to fund 100 projects on the continent. Up to today, we have already deployed 33 million to these groups, both nonprofit and entrepreneurs on the continent. We give funding that ranges between $50,000 and $500,000. And this is the ticket size we have chosen because we've seen that the current funding is either too small for these actors that are really leading the movement. So I'm talking about the funding from microfinance that you may have heard of on the African continent, or there's another type of funding that is too big for these entrepreneurs to access. So I'm talking about funding from big donors, big lenders such as bank or the GEF or GCF, and it's too big for these actors to access. So we really use this ticket size to fill that missing middle and to make sure that this grassroots movement, these entrepreneurs are well supported and receive the funding that they need to implement their restoration activities. These are the 3,200 applications that I was talking about that we received when we launched an application, and we were screening them based on their experience running a restoration project, their potential to scale, Are they proposing activity that can be replicated elsewhere, the environmental impact, the social impact, and the profitability for the enterprises in this movement? And we have documented again this process, and we hope it can inspire or be useful to other actors that want to replicate the funding work we are bringing to the African continent. So currently we have funded those projects, as I mentioned, and they are up and running across 27 African countries. They have promised to restore 20,000 and plus hectare. You can still see that this number is low if we want to achieve the goals of the initiative, but at least it's a start. They are growing 14 million trees, and they self-reported information, and the data we get from them, they talk about creating jobs and livelihoods for about 9,000 new jobs that they have created in the community. So something is really happening, and we want to capitalize on this momentum to bring more restoration on the ground. Some of you may not understand what I mean when I talk about grassroots movement in this space, but this is an example of one of such movement in Africa called the Arbatine Rift Conservation Society, and they work with cooperative of women in these land restoration activities, starting with nursery establishment, as you can see here on the screen, all the way to planting these trees and growing them and nurturing those trees so that they can stay on the ground. And one of the key highlights for this institution is that not only they have the cooperative that they work with, but they also advise other organizations on how to get restoration right. So we see a lot of this movement sprouting across the African continent. This is an entrepreneur in Kenya, and she works with smallholder farmers to grow macadamia nuts, macadamia trees that produce nuts, and these nuts are exported and allows her to produce income for the farmers that she supports, and also to sustain her business. So really, you can see how there are multiple ways, or multiple ways these actors are engaging with this restoration movement. Not only do we provide funding, but we also build the capacity of these restoration actors so that they can themselves be able to attract additional funding and grow their businesses or their organization, and really sustain this sector and movement on the African continent. So we have created this program that we call Land Accelerator, and this is a capacity building program targeting various actors on the African continent. We teach them how to develop bankable businesses. We teach them how to create quality budget for their finances. We help them connect with donors. We teach them how to pitch their restoration project to donors so that they can attract funding. It's a very elaborate program, and we really customize it to the needs that we have identified within these entrepreneurs. Similar to how we document our lessons learned on the monitoring work, we do the same on our finance work. So we have a few insights and articles that really outline what is the status of restoration finance on the African continent, and then what are the key lessons learned from financing, from our finance work, so that, again, the ones that want to do something similar or to try to understand what's happening, they have this information handy. Lastly, I'll work on improving the enabling environment. Here, the idea is that to improve the efficiency, the quality, and the speed of restoration while reducing the cost. This is one of the programs we are still developing on the African continent, and so far we have identified two kind of audience that we will be targeting to really work with them as we improve the enabling environment for restoration on the African continent. So the first audience is government. And we did a stock take to understand what are the key gaps, what are the critical issues or bottlenecks that they are grappling with before we propose solutions. So we've seen, we've heard gaps ranging from ineffective coordination among institutions. We see really on the African continent, restoration still being driven by the ministries of environment, and we see a siloed approach and lack of involvement from, for instance, ministries of agriculture or ministries of finance. And yet we know that those are also going to be critical and very important in ensuring that restoration is successful. Earlier, I mentioned that most of the degraded land is in cropland, so not involving ministries of agriculture in this restoration movement really leaves a big gap that needs to be filled. There are institutional capacity weaknesses, institutions that don't understand how to create policies that can improve restoration, lack of proper guidance on effective restoration practices. So it's a number of gaps that we have identified on the government side. There are also gaps that are faced by these actors that I was mentioning earlier. For instance, they may lack access to quality seeds and seedlings, so which are critical again to supporting this tree-based restoration intervention. There are issues around land tenure, land access, and when that is not clear enough, of course, actors aren't going to see any need to engage in land restoration because there is that worry that they may not reap the benefit from restoration intervention if the land tenure or land access is not as secure as they would like. So really, we went through this stage to understand what are the key challenges on the continent, and we are going to work again using the various tools that we have already developed or that we want to customize to solving working with these actors to solve the key issues that we have observed. So our key tools on the policy or improving the enabling environment include a program that we call Policy Accelerator. This is actually a program that we started in Latin America, and we want to bring into the African continent because we've seen that it's successful. In this program, we will really create space for peer-to-peer capacity building between government and other actors. We've seen again that various countries are different levels of progress, and they experience various successes and challenges. And the message actually is much smoother when it comes from one country to another instead of us telling the countries what to do. So what we do, we use our experience convening multiple stakeholders, and we create this space for them to discuss and exchange knowledge and help really co-create solutions that are adapted into each context. So we do that in the Policy Accelerator program, and we'd be doing more of that on the African continent. We also create Knowledge Hub on incentives. This is where we synthesize information on what is the latest, what are the best policy, what are the successful policy, and make this information available to the countries and actors so that they can extract, pick and choose what works in their context and customize and adjust as they see fit. We bring mentors and policy experts into these spaces as well. So in case countries are not able to respond to other countries' problem, we pair them with policy experts that can help them create solutions that are addressing the policy challenges that are there. And lastly, we are developing this program that we call Monitoring Accelerator, really aiming to monitor the effectiveness of these policies. Once these policies are in place, how effective are they? How useful are they at reducing degradation? Checking how I'm doing on time. We're running a bit late. So all of that I was mentioning was really happened in what I've mentioned as the first phase of AFR 100 program. And we've used the key lessons learned to then figure out what should we do going forward? How do we support this movement as WRI going forward? How do we improve coordination? How do we improve the flow of finance? How do we deploy proper monitoring tools that are going to allow us to track progress? How do we really empower these actors that are on the ground so that they can implement, receive the capacity and the funding and all the support that they really need in order to implement restoration? So we have used those lessons to design the Restore Local program. This is a program that Noaeli mentioned as she was introducing me. And this is a program that is going to support local restoration actors. Many of you, if any of you has read about any success story on restoration in Africa, it was community driven. Stories from Tanzania, Chinyanga, story from Ileila, Niger, all of those were really community driven. And we know this is the way to go on the African continent. NGOs, they come and go, development organizations, they come and go. But if we don't work with communities that live in this environment, restoration is already set to fail. So really, with this Restore Local, we aim to support locally led restoration action on the ground. In priority landscape, this is another key lessons we've learned. By financing restoration actors across the continent, we've seen that, first of all, yes, there is demand, but our finance is being scattered, and it's really hard to see concrete impact on the ground when we scatter our support across the entire continent. So we've moved our support to priority landscape. In Africa, we have 3 of them. One is Lake Kivu River Basin. It's a transboundary landscape between Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC. We have another landscape in Kenya's Greater Rift Valley, and a third landscape in Ghana Cocoa Belt. And this is where we are going to support locally led actions, working with local organizations, local entrepreneurs to support their restoration action in order to really create transformative changes in this degraded landscape. So our support will revolve around capacity building, deploying finance, deploying robust monitoring tools, and then improving the enabling environment so that this restoration can happen and scale. And once we have this done in the priority landscape, the idea is to build then a blueprint that we can then share with other partners and can also help us replicate and scale up across the movement. So that's the plan we are working on. I hope I did not rush too much towards the end, and I'm happy to take any questions to clarify or cover any other aspects that I did not mention in my presentation.